Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We're going to be doing something a little different today. We're always trying to push the boundaries of education research, right?
Right.
Well, we've been kind of wrestling with a question. This editorial from Advances in Health Sciences Education, it really got us thinking
Oh, absolutely.
about, well, data science. It's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Health professions, education, tons of it. But what is it really? Is it actually a science?
It's a great question. And the editorial, the authors really hit the nail on the head. I mean, nobody's saying data science isn't useful,
No, not at all.
but we need to be clear, right? What are we actually dealing with here? What are the ground rules? What makes it a science, especially in an academic setting like ours?
Hmm.
I mean, think about it. People are still arguing over what data science even is.
It's true. I mean, is it just statistics with a new name tag?
Right,
Or
exactly.
some fancy computer science thing?
Or is it, something completely new? Donahoe, back in 2017, he had some thoughts. And then Malik, more recently, 2022, I mean, they both kind of point to this like, well, it's kind of fuzzy, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. But this editorial we're diving into today, it gives us a framework, which I thought was super helpful
Oh, yeah.
to kind of break this down. So they say, look, let's think about what makes something a science, especially in terms of how we use theories, right?
Yeah.
Then let's look at the data itself. Like, how do we get it? How good is it? Can we even trust it?
Right.
And finally, who are these data scientists anyway? Where do they fit in?
Huge questions.
Right. So big questions. I'm excited to dig into this. Let's start with that first part, the whole nature of science and how data science uses theories. The editorial kind of points out that sometimes data science starts with the data first and then looks for patterns instead of starting with the theory, right?
Absolutely. I think what they're getting at is often you have these massive data sets, and the first thing people do is just start looking for correlations, trends, anything that sticks out. It's like,
Data mining.
yeah, exactly, data mining. And there's this assumption sometimes that the truth is just sitting there in the data waiting to be discovered. So you get this very pattern-focused approach, maybe without even a clear theoretical reason for why those patterns should exist.
It's almost like the data is speaking first, and then we're trying to figure out what it's saying.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's very different from, say, a lot of traditional science, where you start with a hypothesis, a theory, and then you gather data specifically to test it.
Right. So in data science, sometimes the questions come after you see the data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
the editorial brings up statistics and computer science, which I thought was a helpful comparison.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, those fields are all about building awesome tools for analyzing data.
Right.
They give us the methods, the algorithms, but they're not necessarily focused on the meaning behind the data itself, at least not in a specific context like health professions education.
Right. It's like they give us the hammer, but we have to figure out what nail to hit.
Exactly. And they brought up another interesting point. Fundamental models.
Oh, yeah. Eisenstein, 2024, right? He was talking about these AI models that are designed to work across all sorts of different tasks. How does that fit in here?
Well, I think it shows how much emphasis there is on this broad applicability, sometimes even at the expense of really deep context-specific understanding. I mean, these fundamental models, they're incredible for prediction, for automation, but they're not necessarily helping us build new theories about how people learn in health professions education specifically.
So it's not like they're useless,
Not at all.
but they're not necessarily advancing our core knowledge base in the same way as more focused research.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it.
So what they're highlighting is this potential gap. We've got lots of data, great tools, practical applications, but are we really generating new theories? Are we digging deeper into the why?
Exactly. And that brings us to the next big idea they talk about, which is programmatic approaches to inquiry, right? Science is supposed to be cumulative.
Wait, building on what came before.
Exactly. Researchers should be building on each other's work, challenging theories, adding to the knowledge base. It's a long game, right?
Sure.
It takes a community working over time.
Like a big conversation, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And the editorial actually makes a comparison here to the scholarship of teaching and learning.
Oh,
SOTL.
I love SOTL.
Me too. And for SOTL to really work, it has to be shared. It has to be a community effort.
Right. You can't just keep your findings to yourself. You have to put them out there, let people critique them, build on them.
Exactly. And here's where things get tricky, because the editorial points out that a lot of data science in HPE is driven by corporate needs and funding.
Which, I mean, it makes sense, right? Everyone wants data expertise, but what does that mean for us?
Well, it means there's a potential tension, right? Because corporate interests, while they might overlap with theoretical exploration sometimes,
Sure.
their focus is often on more immediate practical applications, getting a return on investment.
Right. They want results they can use now.
Exactly. And that can sometimes push data scientists away from those bigger, more theoretical questions, the kind that really push our field forward.
So it's not that corporate funding is bad.
No,
It's just we have to be aware of its influence on the kind of research that gets done.
absolutely. And this brings us to another really important point the editorial makes about rigor, right? What do we even consider scholarly activity?
Right. What are the standards? In traditional science, rigor is like the holy grail, right? It's all about how thorough your methods are, how you think critically about the data.
Absolutely. And there's this set of criteria that Glassick and his colleagues came up with back in 1997
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
for what makes something scholarly, clear goals, adequate preparation, appropriate methods, significant results, that kind of thing. It's like a checklist,
Yeah,
right?
and effective presentation, too, right? Making sure you're communicating clearly, that you're being reflective about your own work.
Exactly. And those standards, they should apply to any academic field, really.
Yeah.
And I think the editorial makes a really good point here. They say, look, we are seeing data science research getting published in HPE journals.
Yeah.
Right.
After peer review.
Right.
Yeah.
So clearly it can meet those scholarly standards, at least some of it.
So it's not like it's inherently unscholarly.
No.
It's just we need to be thoughtful about how we're doing it, right?
Absolutely. And that brings us to another key aspect of science, right? Responsibility for the data itself.
Right, and I think this is one of the places where things get really interesting with data science and education.
Oh, yeah.
Because traditionally, scientists, they're like super hands-on with their data. They design the experiments, they collect it, they know every detail. It's like their baby.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. They have ownership. But as the editorial points out, a lot of the data in education, it comes from online learning platforms, from institutional databases, and it raises some big questions for you, the listener. Like, what does a click really mean? Or a login? Or how long someone spends on a web page? Is that really telling us about learning?
Right, it's so easy to collect all this data,
Oh,
but
yeah.
what does it actually mean?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And then you have the Hawthorne effect, which the editorial mentions. People change their behavior when they know they're being watched.
Huh.
Or what Wong and Steven in 2019 called the implied social presence.
Right, just knowing you're being tracked can change how you act.
Absolutely. And then you have to think about whether a learning activity is voluntary or mandatory. I mean, that's going to influence the data you get, right?
Absolutely. And then things get even more complicated when we talk about integrating learner data with electronic health records. I mean, that's a whole other level. What data is even relevant? How do we access it ethically? Can we even make sense of it?
It's a huge challenge. And of course, all of this brings us to research ethics, right? Informed consent, anonymity, making sure we're treating this data responsibly.
Right. And the editorial talks about data sharing, too. Ellaway, in 2024, he talked about this growing expectation that researchers should share their data sets.
Yes. So others can replicate their findings, scrutinize their methods. It's all about transparency.
Which makes you wonder, should we be sharing the code, too? The actual computer code used in the analysis.
It's a good question, right? I mean, the code is such a crucial part of the process. Without it, can you really understand and replicate the research?
Yeah, it's something to think about. Now, the editorial also talks about something they call active data versus passive data, which I thought was a really interesting distinction.
Oh, yeah, it's super helpful. So think of active data as the kind of data a researcher directly controls. Like in a lab experiment, you decide what to manipulate, how to measure things.
Right. You're actively involved in creating the data.
Exactly. But passive data, it's data that's already out there. It was collected for some other purpose, and you have to work with what you've got.
So like those online learning platforms we were talking about.
Exactly. And the editorial points out that this passive data, it comes with some inherent challenges, especially when you're doing secondary data analysis, analyzing data someone else collected.
Yeah.
You have to worry about biases in how the data was gathered, the overall quality.
Right. And they specifically mentioned electronic health records, which, I mean, that data is notoriously messy sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Sarwar and his colleagues, they wrote about that in 2022.
Right. So the point is, a lot of data science in HPE relies on this passive data, and we have to be extra careful about its limitations.
Absolutely. But I think it's important to point out, even though data science is often quantitative, the editorial also says qualitative data can be really valuable.
Oh, absolutely. And they mentioned Sharif's 2018 framework for doing secondary analysis of qualitative data. What are some of the things data scientists need to be thinking about when they're using someone else's qualitative data?
So Sharif's framework, it really stresses this idea of, first of all, fit. Does this data even answer the question I'm asking? And then quality. How good is this data? How trustworthy is it? And timelines. Is it still relevant? These things become even more important when you're working with data that wasn't collected specifically for your research.
Right. You have to be even more critical.
Absolutely. Now, the editorial also brings up this interesting point about extrapolation and something called latent modeling. In science, we often try to make inferences about things we didn't directly observe based on the data we have.
Right, like filling in the gaps.
Exactly. So the question they ask is, how much of this deep latent modeling, this attempt to understand the hidden factors driving educational outcomes, is actually happening in data science in HPE?
Yeah, are we just scratching the surface or are we really digging deep?
Right, and they point to a 2012 paper by Bosgarden on latent class analysis and the fact that it was cited later by Ding and Homer in 2024.
But they also raise a really interesting question about that citation.
Yeah.
They're like, does the fact that there aren't tons of studies using these advanced modeling techniques mean that data science and HPE is still very young, still developing, or maybe even not quite a fully formed science yet?
It's a provocative question, right? Because
Yeah.
if a field is constantly building on itself, theoretically and methodologically, you'd expect to see more consistent use and development of these sophisticated techniques.
Right. It's something to think about. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about peer review. I mean, this is the gold standard in science for ensuring quality, right?
Absolutely. But the editorial points out that peer review for data science can it be tricky,
Oh, yeah.
especially with passive data. Because often, reviewers can't access the original data sets or the full details of the methods used to collect and analyze the data. There might be confidentiality agreements, proprietary issues.
So it's like a black box.
Yeah, a bit. And the editorial argues that if we can't do proper peer review, data science risks becoming more like internal evaluations, instead of true scientific inquiry.
Right, because you can't really judge the quality of the work if you can't see all the steps involved.
Exactly. And they point out that peer review of the papers themselves, it's important, but it's not enough. We need clear standards for evaluating both the quantitative and qualitative aspects of data science research. Like Sharif was saying, qualitative data has its own unique considerations.
Right. And ultimately, it's the researcher's responsibility to be as transparent as possible.
Right. Absolutely. To describe their data and methods in detail. Okay, let's talk ethics and academic freedom. These are huge issues in any field, but especially with data science.
Yeah, so what are some of the ethical points the editorial brings up?
Well, they say we need clear guidelines for data science specifically. How do we get informed consent when we're using educational data? How do we protect anonymity? How do we avoid manipulating or misinterpreting data? And, who are data scientists accountable to, ethically speaking?
These are tough questions, right? And then they bring up academic freedom, which I thought was really interesting.
Oh, so important. They're basically asking, does data science and HPE encourage critical thinking? Does it challenge the status quo? Is it really pushing boundaries like we expect from academic disciplines?
Right, because sometimes data can be used to just reinforce what we already think.
Exactly. And the editorial contrasts this with the culture you often find in corporate settings.
Right, which is more about, following the rules, minimizing risks.
Yeah, it's a different environment. So the big question they're asking is data science just about generating data for decision making? Or is it about something more? Is it about challenging assumptions, pushing for new understanding?
Right, and they point out that in applied fields like HPE, the lines can get really blurry.
Oh, yeah. And the fact that data science is becoming its own separate thing might actually make it harder to connect it to the core values of academic inquiry.
Right, so that's the ethical side of things. But then there's also this whole issue of commercial and institutional activity, right?
Yeah, because data science is everywhere, right? And the editorial notes that both for-profit and nonprofit entities are getting involved in data science in HPE.
Which, I mean, on the one hand, it's great that people are seeing the value of data.
Absolutely.
But what does it mean for the field as a whole?
Well, the editorial raises a concern that institutions might start outsourcing their data science work to external companies instead of building their own in-house teams.
And what's wrong with that?
Well, it could further separate data science from the academic world, If the work is being done by people outside of the university, outside of the traditional research environment.
Right, it's not necessarily grounded in the same values.
Exactly. And the editorial argues that this could make it even harder to claim that data science is truly a science in the academic sense.
So it's not just about the methods.
Ah,
It's about the whole context in which the work is being done.
absolutely. And that leads us to another really interesting point. Who are these data scientists anyway?
Right. And where do they come from?
Well, the editorial reminds us that data science is often a team effort. And they cite Young and Dubé's work from 2024 on team dynamics as another factor to consider when we're thinking about what makes something a science.
Right, because science is a collaborative process, right?
Exactly. But here's the thing. A lot of data scientists, they come from backgrounds in programming, statistics, information systems. They might not have a lot of experience in education research or the social sciences.
So they're bringing the technical skills,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
but maybe not the deep knowledge of the field itself.
Exactly. And the question the editorial poses is, are these people really scientists in the context of HPE? I mean, education is a complex social science. Do they have the expertise to ask the right questions, to interpret the data in a meaningful way?
Right, because it's not just about the numbers, right?
Absolutely. You need that deep understanding of the context to really make sense of what the data is telling you. And the editorial touches on training programs because there are more and more data science programs popping up all the time.
Yeah, it's a hot field.
Oh, yeah. But they bring up this idea from Norman, 2011, about immigrant scholars versus settler scholars. They're suggesting that a lot of data scientists in HPE might be coming from other fields, bringing their data skills, but maybe not really settling into the scholarship of HPE itself.
So they're not fully invested in the field, in a way.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, should we be training data scientists within HPE? So they're not just applying their skills, but they're really immersed in the field.
Right, like from the ground up.
Absolutely. So to sum up, the editorial concludes that whether data science in HPE is a science, it's complicated. There's no easy answer.
It's that classic academic, it depends, right?
Exactly. But they do give us some key takeaways. They say if you're doing data science in HPE, you need to be thinking about theory, you need to be super careful about your data quality, and you need to build diverse interdisciplinary teams.
Right, so it's not just about the data itself.
No.
It's about the whole approach.
Exactly. And it's worth mentioning, they do acknowledge that the papers in this special issue, they show that data science can be done rigorously and published in academic journals.
Right, so it's not impossible.
No, not at all.
Okay.
And they also point out that other areas of scholarship, like program evaluation, even historical research, they also face questions about whether they fit the traditional definition of science.
It's not just a data science problem.
Exactly. And the editorial offers a few possible explanations for why we're so keen on calling data science a science. It could be aspirational, like we want it to be rigorous, so we're holding it to that standard.
Right, like we're setting the bar high.
Exactly. Or it could be more strategic. Calling it a science gives it more authority, more credibility.
Right, sounds more official.
Yeah. But there's also this other possibility, which is that maybe data science is a new kind of science, a new way of doing things that we're still trying to figure out.
So it's not about judging it against old standards.
Right. It's about understanding it on its own terms.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners?
I think the editorial is calling for critical reflection. If you're involved in data science in HPE, you need to think about these challenges. How could we make this work as robust and ethical and scientifically sound as possible?
Right, it's a call to action, really.
Absolutely. So there you have it, folks. Another deep dive into the complex world of education research.
And as always, we leave you with more questions than answers.
That's how we roll.
Right, but seriously, we hope this has made you think about data science in a new way. What does it mean for your work? For your field?
And here's a final question for you to ponder as you go about your day. If we want data science to be a true science in HPE, what are the most important steps we need to take? What are the biggest challenges?
It's an ongoing conversation, and we hope you'll keep exploring it with us. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.